We have come to chapter 7 as we continue on in our chapter-by-chapter study through the book of Ecclesiastes. I'll just remind you real quick that if you want my teaching notes, just give me your email address. I'll send them out to you probably Monday morning. I also want to mention we're not going to do Wednesday evening Bible study this week. Randy and I are going trick-or-treating. I'm going to be the Lone Ranger. Randy's going to be Tonto because he and Elizabeth Warren are both Cherokee, and so that's Wednesday. Chapter 7. The theme of verses 1 through 14 in chapter 17 is the better life. What is a better life? You know, we have sayings like, life is better at the beach. I would agree with that. Boy, would I agree with that. Life is better with coffee. I would agree with that too. And on that list of sayings goes. But what is the better life according to Ecclesiastes? And how did we acquire the better life? And we're going to discover that this morning. I teach you as you study to look for words that are repeated in the text. And in this chapter, one of the repeated words is the word better. You will find it 11 times in the chapter. Something else you're going to notice about chapter 7 that's different from what has occurred in the first 6 chapters. First 6 chapters was in a narrative style, sort of that writing in a journal, which is what Solomon is doing. But in chapter 7, he turns to the use of proverbs. Proverbs are short, sort of generalized principles of truth. They are not commands. They are not promises to claim. They're just short, generalized principles of truth. And what we see is Solomon starts chapter 7 is he uses comparative proverbs. He will say, this is better than that in a proverb style. It gives us 7 statements of wisdom that lead to a better life. And we're going to just jump right in. Verse 1. A good name is better than fine perfume, and the day of death better than the day of birth. A good name is better than a designer brand name perfume. Your character, your reputation, Solomon is saying, is of supreme value. A cologne, a perfume may attract people initially, but it only lingers for a while and then it passes. Whereas that fragrance of inner character is influential and consequential. That reminds me of a story about Maurice. Maurice and I were getting on an elevator. I don't know, I'm sure I've told you this story before. We're getting on this elevator and there's a very wealthy woman there. The doors close. The woman sort of arrogantly takes out her perfume, spritzes herself, and she says, Eau de Paris, $150 an ounce. And not to be outdone, Maurice passes gas. A pungent, almost lethal green haze filled the elevator. Eau de broccoli, he said. $2 a pound. And the teaching point in that true story is this. It doesn't matter how good you smell if your personality stinks. Okay? You'll remember that. And it's true. A good name is better than fine perfume. And piggybacked upon that is the follow-up phrase, and the day of death is better than the day of birth. Now that sounds like more of the cynical comments of the depressed person. We've heard comments like that in the book of Ecclesiastes. Life is so full of misery that dying is a welcome relief from this meaningless life. We've heard that. Life under the sun. Yeah, it's meaningless. It's a chasing after the wind. Under the sun, without God in the picture. Life apart from God Yeah, it's meaningless. But that is not what Solomon is saying here. As we read through the flow of thought in the next several verses, it becomes apparent that what he's actually saying is that when someone dies, and we consider that, it has a more significant impact on us than when someone we know gives birth. The reason is that death drives us to think seriously about the meaning and the purpose of life. The day of birth, that's a day of rejoicing. The day of death is a day of reflection. A funeral causes us to soberly ponder and evaluate our own life. It always does. There's a day of birth. There's a day when your name will be in the obituary column. And Solomon's point is the life that you live between those two events determines the name that you leave, the legacy that you leave behind. And it's all about the dash between those two dates. Be a person of character. And a funeral can be a great teacher because it reminds us of that. Wisdom gained at a funeral can lead to a better life. And that thought continues for the next couple verses. Verse 2. It is better to go to a house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting. For death is the destiny of everyone. The living should take this to heart. New Living Translation puts it this way. It is better to spend your time at funerals than at festivals. Why is that? Well, again, because the funeral makes us think soberly about our own mortality. It makes us think about, why am I here? Where am I going? What kind of impact am I going to leave? Death has a way of distilling life down to what is ultimately important. Nathaniel Hawthorne said, a grave wherever found preaches a short and pithy sermon to the soul. And it's true. That was really illustrated for me this week. On Friday, in fact, I did a funeral service. Young man, just 26 years old. Cause of death is still undetermined, but probably from an overdose. It was obvious that this young guy had not been dealt the best hand in life. It was true. Sort of sad that way. Life had not been easy for him. And I meet with mom and the stepdad, and I'm starting to get to know him, and they tell me, he was very non-judgmental. He was kind. He was such an accepting person. And he lived in that sort of fringe group of outcasts of society, our cruel society. But he would tell people, it's okay to be different. You don't need to fit in. I began to sort of admire this kid that I'd never met. And then I go and I do the funeral service, and there's about 40 people of his age. Orange hair, dreadlocks, body piercings everywhere, tattoos, all those forms of self-expression that old judgmental guys like me just don't get. We just don't get that. But in my past experiences is kids like that, they'll come to the visitation and then they'll leave. But these kids, they stayed for the entire funeral service. And then 45-minute drive to the cemetery, and they all came to the cemetery as well. Just lots of grief. But I thought, man, I have this captive congregation in the classroom of sorrow and death. And I was just praying, God, you know what? Let them hear Jesus, not churchy stuff. Just let them experience Jesus. Our society, like the lyrics of a Paul Simon song I referred to earlier in this series, we just continue to pretend that life will never end. And the flowers never bend in the rainfall, the lyrics say. But that's our society. And kids today, especially, we do them such a disservice when we protect them from this classroom. Death and sorrow is such a great teacher. And when we learn the lesson, we live a better life. We do. We live a more purposeful, intentional, deliberate life. Verse 3. Frustration, other versions say sadness. Sadness is better than laughter, because a sad face is good for the heart. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of pleasure. Now Solomon also wrote, a cheerful heart is good medicine. We've looked at that in this series. And it's true, a cheerful heart is good medicine. But he also says, a sad face is good for the heart. Sorrow can be more beneficial than laughter because, again, during those periods of sorrow, you assess, you evaluate life on a deeper level. Grief is one of the best teachers in life. It distills life down to the very basics. Times of sorrow can be times when we really mature. Levity doesn't produce that. There's a simple little poem. It's been years since I've seen this, but it's true. I walked a mile with pleasure. She chatted all the way, but left me none the wiser for all she had to say. I walked a mile with sorrow, and ne'er a word said she, but oh, the things I learned from her. It's true. When sorrow walked with me, that's when we learn. And it's in that context, okay, again, Proverbs are generalized principles of truth. We go, sadness is not always good for the heart. You're right. There are times we need laughter in our lives. Laughter is good medicine. But there are times when sorrow really is good for the heart. It leads us to the better life. It's one of the most powerful instructors, death and sorrow. That's point one. We're going to discover two more teachers to the better life. Verse 5. It is better to heed the rebuke of a wise person than to listen to the song of fools. Like the crackling of thorns under the pot, so is the laughter of fools. This too is meaningless. Solomon wrote an awful lot about the value of rebuke. You find it over and over again, especially in the book of Proverbs. I just decided to include a few of them for you. Do not rebuke mockers, or they will hate you. Rebuke the wise, and they will love you. Instruct the wise, and they will be wiser still. Teach the righteous, and they will add to their learning. Chapter 15, only a fool despises a parent's discipline. Whoever learns from correction is wise. Yeah, we can get correction and not learn from it, can't we? Verse 17, a single rebuke does more for a person of understanding than 100 lashes on the back of a fool. There are times in our lives when what we need is that gentle embrace, encouragement. There are other times we need kind of a swift kick in the pants. Nobody likes to go to the classroom of rebuke because, too often rebuke looks like this. Yeah, Proverbs 17, that sort of looks like you. I just noticed that. Nobody likes to go to that classroom, but that's not rebuke. That's verbal assault. Rebuke, actually, it's so misused. We got another phone? No, husbands, don't nudge your wife on this one, but that is not rebuke. That is not rebuke. That is verbal abuse. And yet rebuke, that word sometimes gets so misused in some Christian circles. It's really nothing more than a cover-up for spiritual abuse. Just want to rebuke you, brother. No, biblical rebuke is full of grace. It's full of truth. It's motivated by love. It's motivated by concern for the person who receives it. And I think here's one of those appropriate applications for a verse that we saw in chapter 6. You remember in chapter 6, it said, the more the words, the less the meaning. Great application when you're bringing constructive criticism. That's the only word that comes to my mind, but I've always thought that is such an oxymoron. Constructive criticism. I'm going to build you up and tear you down with criticism. The better life, here's what Solomon is actually saying. The better life comes from corrective instruction. A rebuke from the wise, received by the wise. And he contrasts that rebuke with the song of fools, which he says is like the thorns in a campfire. Thorns in a campfire is going to make a lot of noise, but it's really not going to provide any beneficial heat. And so we've met the second teacher that leads us to the better life. We learn from the classroom of sorrow and death. We can also learn from the classroom of rebuke. And on we go to the third teacher. Verse 8. The end of a matter is better than its beginning. Yeah, I get that. I sure like the finish line a whole lot better than the starting gate. The end of a matter is better than its beginning. And patience in getting to the finish line is better than pride. Do not be quickly provoked in your spirit, for anger resides in the lap of fools. Do not say, why were the old days better than these? It's not wise to ask such questions. Jump down to verse 13. Consider what God has done. Consider the hand of God in your life. Ponder it. Think about it. Mull it over. Consider what God has done. Who can straighten what he has made crooked? Well, the answer is no one. That's his sovereign prerogative. He alone. He's the author of times and events in our life. Verse 14. When times are good, be happy. But when times are bad, that is when you find yourself in these classrooms of sadness and death and rebuke, consider this. God has made the one as well as the other. He's made the good times. He's made those classroom times in your life also. Now there's a contrast in those from verse 8 down through verse 14 between two different people. There is the impatient person, the demanding, controlling, easily angered complainer. That impatient person is also a prideful person. Impatience and pride really are synonymous. Perhaps you haven't thought of it that way, but our impatience is a prideful demonstration that we believe we have a better way of dealing with things. It should go my way. That's the first person. Impatient, prideful person. And then there is the patient person who has come to accept the fact that God is sovereign. God has his own timetable. God makes a straight thing crooked if he so chooses. God makes good times. God makes bad times. He doesn't operate on our timetable. So now we have two options. We can either follow the course of the prideful, impatient person, or we can patiently depend and trust in and wait upon the wise and sovereign and loving God. Wait. We hate to wait. That's that fallen part of our nature, that impatient, prideful nature. We don't want to wait. We want it on our time schedule. But the better life, according to Ecclesiastes chapter 7, comes when we learn to trust and depend upon God in the classroom of waiting. You don't develop patience by reading a self-help book on how to have patience. It arises in the classroom of waiting. It matures as a fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience. It matures as we submit and rest in this knowledge that God orchestrates events into our lives. Like a wise physician, he'll write a prescription depending upon what we will need. There are days we're in the house of feasting. There are days we're in the house of mourning. There's times when life is filled with laughter. There's times when life is just filled with incredible grief. One day we'll be praised. The next day we're rebuked. And I'll say it again, nobody wants these teachers. Nobody wants to be in that classroom of sorrow, rebuke, or waiting. Some grow really bitter. Some grow really hardened when they have to enter those classrooms. But others gain a heart of wisdom that guides them to a better life. Okay? And that thought is really key today. It's through the classrooms of sorrow and rebuke and waiting that we gain a heart of wisdom. And it's through wisdom that we live the better life. That's really what holds this chapter together. It's not that word better. It's the contrast between the wise and the fool. Solomon really likes to speak about wisdom. 35 times in the last half of Ecclesiastes, you're going to find the word wise or wisdom. 12 times in just chapter 7 alone, we find those words. And they're contrasted with the fool. So you need to understand those two words. Foolishness in the Bible does not have anything to do with mental acuity or cognitive ability. It is interesting. The word is moros. We get our word moron from it. But it has nothing to do with our IQ level. Foolishness in the Bible is choosing to live life under the sun. That's that key phrase in the book of Ecclesiastes. Living life under the sun, apart from God, without God in the picture. David says, Psalm 14, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. That's living life under the sun, just on that horizontal plane. They are corrupt. Their deeds are vile. There is no one who does good. Foolishness manifests itself, first of all, in pridefulness. I want it done my way, on my timetable. I choose to live under the sun. I don't acknowledge that there is a God over me. I'm the master of my own fate. I'm in control. Paul in Romans talks about that, how men exchange the glory of God for glory of created things. He says that their foolish hearts were darkened. They claimed to be wise, but they became fools. A fool is someone who lives their life apart from God, says there is no God. Foolishness then manifests itself in that pridefulness, and then manifests itself in sinful behavior, where then you ultimately lose your soul. One of the most powerful parables Jesus tells, the parable of the fool. I just wanted to read it. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. Well, praise God for that. No, he thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. And then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain, and I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. That sounds a little bit like Ecclesiastes. You know, when you're living life under the sun and things are going well, but you're not really considering, you're not looking wisely at life, at the shortness of our life, the foolishness. But God said to him, you fool, this very night Your life will be demanded from you. That's on my timetable. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? So the foolishness demonstrated by the man in the parable is this belief that he's somehow in control of life, and he has put blinders on the fact that, and we have this little journey, and then what? And then what? No concern for the eternal destiny of his soul. That is foolishness. What is wisdom? We think of wisdom as IQ, how many degrees you have from college, how many initials you have after your name, but wisdom in the Bible has nothing to do with that. Not your scores on your SAT, nothing. Biblical wisdom has everything to do with where you place God in your life and what place his word has in your life. The wise person who is someone who is skilled at living a godly life. Skilled at right living. That's what the word wisdom means. Skilled at right living. And so the underlying question that intertwined all the way through the chapter, it's not stated, but the underlying question is, are you going to choose to be wise, or are you going to choose to be foolish? Are you going to choose to live your life revering and honoring God, acknowledging God, or are you going to live life under the sun? It's a question to ponder. Let's pray to God. Gracious God, some of us this morning may be in one of those classrooms. We would pray for them, just that you would give them a teachable spirit. You'd be gentle in your instruction to them. When we go through those schools of grief and sadness, waiting, protect us from not becoming angry and resentful or bitter. Protect us from the foolishness of trying to drive the car and putting you in the back seat. Give us a teachable spirit. And we wait upon you, and although we can't see, we live by faith, not by sight. We live by faith knowing that you're a wise, loving, good God, that you will direct our life to a good end. And you will conform us more and more into the image of your Son through those schools. And so, again, we want to be ready students. And to that end, we pray that we become more and more like your Son, so that your kingdom would come here on earth as it is in heaven, that people in this dark world would come to know you as Savior through us, God, if you would be so gracious to use us in that. And that would be our prayer. Thanks for everyone who gathered here today. Put your hand of strength and protection, grace upon them. We love you, Lord. In Jesus' name, we gather. Hey, no closing song. Take a few moments just to greet one another. Don't rush off. Love you guys. Awesome to see the place kind of fill up a little bit. Have an awesome week.